Welcome to today's show, and with me is Andrew Rall.
Hi there.
Andrew is from the Distillery 031, eh?
That's right, Durban's own.
Durban's own distillery. Andrew, you started about nearly 9 years ago now, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
And were you a hobby distiller before that?
Yep, started off as a hobby distiller,
Okay.
got a license to be able to distill at home. Obviously wasn't allowed to sell at that stage.
Okay.
And then started building up the equipment till eventually my wife gave me an ultimatum and told me either I needed to give up the hobby or I needed to make a business of it, but she wanted her garage and outbuildings back. So that was about 5 years ago, and we started looking for commercial premises.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your background. I know that you worked for Unilever, but that's many, many years ago.
Absolutely, yes. So I've kind of come from a commercial background,
brand
corporate stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, on the branding side. Okay. So I worked in corporate for quite a long time as an innovation manager at Unilever on the branding side of things.
What sort of product?
Right across their business, mainly on their personal care side of their business.
Like smelly stuff.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so lots of fragrances, not so much flavor.
Okay.
Then in 2004, I left Unilever and started my own businesses, which I still run today. The one side was brand consulting and design, and then the other business, insights and consumer insights research.
So research stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. That's you need special skills for that, don't you?
You do. I learned quite a lot of that on the job at Unilever.
Okay.
Obviously studied that as well, and it's all been pretty useful in terms of building a brand and understanding what people are looking for.
Okay, but then agency stuff, and what sort of clients?
Right across the board, from big corporate clients to smaller startups. But yeah, we've worked across. We've done work for the likes of SAB and those type of clients as well.
Those must be more interesting than...
A lot more interesting for us, but it's a lot bigger than anything in the craft sector, that's for sure.
Yeah. And are you still involved in those research and brand businesses?
So I've got a partner who's taken over the research side, and I just get involved from a strategic point of view. And the branding side, I've also got a creative director who runs it day to day, but I'm involved in the sort of bigger projects there, and that's been quite a useful business to have in developing our own brands for Distillery 031. So we've done all the brand work in-house, and I've been quite involved in that. Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about some of the more interesting brands that you came across. You've mentioned some motorbike brand that you were involved with.
Yeah, so a while back I took the decision to start building my own brands or trying to get involved in brands where I had some kind of ownership and involvement rather than selling time, because that's typically what you do with an agency. No matter how well you do your job, at the end of the day you get paid the same rate per hour, and then you got to find another job. So I started looking for opportunities to invest in smaller brands. One of the projects I was involved with was Royal Enfield motorbikes. The other one was the Foundry, which is a building development in Station Drive. And I was very involved in the development of the Station Drive precinct and the identity for that.
And are you still involved in that?
Still involved in that, yeah. So when I left, or when I decided to take my distillery out of my house and go commercial with it, I needed to find commercial premises. And in order to be able to get a license in KZN, it's a pretty long process. It's typically takes up to 2 years. And when you apply for your license, you actually have to have premises for your distillery. So you can't apply for a license and then when you get your license to start renting somewhere. So you need to find premises, and they've got to be zoned for industrial use. So you can't start it in your backyard or in a restaurant or something like that. It has to be industrial premises. So I needed to find space for the distillery, and I knew that I was going to be holding onto the space for a long time and not getting any return on it. So I figured that it would work quite well to find a space that I could use for my other businesses and set up the distillery at the same time. And that's when I started looking for spaces. I'd seen what had happened in other
cities.
Other cities, exactly. Traveled quite a lot in the US and the UK and seen urban renewal zones there. And then I saw what happened in Braamfontein and Joburg and Maboneng, and then down in Cape Town and Woodstock. And I just kind of kept thinking something was going to happen in Durban, and it never did. There were a lot of talk about developments.
So everybody was waiting for you to start.
Well, it turns out, it seems like it was. I was waiting for everyone else, and no one did it. So eventually, necessity is kind of the mother of invention. I gave notice to our landlord for the agency business, and needed to find premises, and I had 4 months, and the clock started ticking, and there was nothing developing. So I just decided to go for it and start developing something myself. And that's when I found the empty building at 43 Station Drive. It was completely derelict, an absolute state. The ceiling was caving in, the floor had disgusting blue carpet tiles, the electricity didn't even have earth leakage and wasn't compliant, so it was a mess. But it was a nice big building. It was kind of affordable, and I saw the potential for the street. It's an interesting street. It's quite centrally located. It's right next to the railway line, so it's got quite a nice kind of atmosphere to it. And I saw there were other buildings also available which could potentially grow. So I took the leap and decided to take the entire building, which was a lot more space than I really needed for my businesses.
Did you buy it or rent it?
Initially, I was renting it, and I've now since then got some investors involved, and we're in the process of buying it. So, finally, it's kind of
no one has tripled the value, I guess.
Unfortunately, the owner made the money out of my hard work, but that's the nature of the game, I guess. And at least I've got a home for the distillery, and Station Drive has developed now. Loads of other businesses have moved in, and the precinct has become really Durban's kind of creative hotspot. Yeah. So ultimately, what I wanted in a place like that was to have other creative people around me, and to have that kind of atmosphere and vibe. And nowhere in Durban was like that. So now we finally got that in Station Drive.
Okay, and what is the Foundry? Is it just a building, or is it a business?
So the Foundry is the building. The idea with that building was to have a mixed-use space, which again is something Durban doesn't even have the right zoning law. So we've had to work with the council to come up with a completely new zoning category for mixed-use space, because it's a relatively new concept. So the idea is that you can have manufacturing. So our distillery, below us we've got that brewing company and S43 in the building, which is manufacturing. We've also got a restaurant, or S43 is a restaurant. And then upstairs is office space. And funnily enough, we've got Poison City who rent office space from us. So we've got someone who makes beer and someone who sells beer, and a whole lot of other businesses in between.
And quite a few guys that drink beer.
A lot of people that drink beer, absolutely. I think everyone drinks beer, so that's a common denominator.
Okay.
So that's the idea with mixed use spaces. You can have manufacturer, you can have retail, you can have office space in one building. Because in a traditional society, you didn't have an industrial area miles out and then residential area. You'd have your homes, and you'd have your baker that lived on the corner, and your pub around the side where he'd be brewing his own beer. So everyone was kind of integrated. It's only relatively recently the cities have got fractured up.
So we build Westmead and those
absolutely,
funny places.
I mean, I guess if you're making chemicals and things which are pollutants, you want to have that away from other businesses.
I guess so,
But with craft business like distilling, like baking, all those type of businesses, it works quite well to have it integrated with other businesses.
Yeah, or you could even do like Lucy and Lee and live in your distillery
well, I mean, that is one of the things on the cards for Station Drive. Is the next component is to have some residential. So at some stage, I think that will happen. That's the dream. I guess work never leaves you, but it is nice to be able to work and live in the same precinct.
Sounds a little bit romantic, like a London or thing.
Exactly, the kind of loft living, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And when I spoke to you yesterday, I had an interview with our friends from the Midlands Distillery, and she said, I mean, they want to do the same, live in their distillery, build a distillery in the Midlands somewhere and live there, and it sounds very romantic. I mean, I grew up on a farm where you lived on a working farm, and all I wanted was to live somewhere which was away from all the hustle and bustle of the workday. Yeah,
I definitely think there is something to be said for that. When you've got your own business, you live it and eat it and breathe it. And I must say, just crossing the Mgeni and getting home and being able to not think about work for a few hours every day is quite important, because otherwise it does tend to take over.
Yeah. So in the process of starting your distillery, you only came onto my sort of radar screen maybe a year ago or 18 months ago. When did you, if you say you started distilling, you moved out to your home 5 years ago, Was that all in a process of applying?
Yes, yeah. So about 4 years ago, we got the premises, and we started commissioning the distillery, and obviously got commercial equipment, and started finalizing and perfecting our recipes.
And applying for the license, or did you have it already?
No, we started applying for the license. We could do all that stuff, we just couldn't sell it.
Yeah.
And then we got our license in 2015. So we were actually probably the first craft distillery, well, definitely in KZN, but after Jorgensen's and Inverroche, we were the third craft distillery in South Africa, I would say. So we were one of the first, but we started off predominantly selling through 031 Bar and Restaurant, which is a tasting room and a bar and restaurant on site. And then we started selling through...
When did you open that?
That opened at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. We also started doing festivals. So we have done SA on Tap 3 times now. We've done quite a few festivals and gin festivals in Joburg and Cape Town and that type of thing. And then retail we started last year, so 2016 in KZN. And then this year we've started selling in Gauteng and in the Western Cape. So we really wanted to build our base right before we started trying to sell, because if you don't support your customers and you can't give the kind of service, you end up getting listed and then very quickly delisted, which is not what we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first distilleries, definitely the first one that I visited was Roger Jorgensen.
Yes.
And I wonder how many years that was when that was, but certainly very interesting character and very helpful in teaching and spreading the gospel, I think.
Absolutely.
But I remember looking for Dragon Ginger Beer, and he was sharing a premises with Woodstock Distillery.
Yes.
And that for me was the first time where I saw just alcohol flowing out of a still, and with a vessel catching it, and the actual process of distilling. For me, that was the first, and I think, that was even before I knew about Inverroche, I think.
Yeah, so that would have been probably 2000 and beginning of 2016, late 2015. I think that's when Woodstock started distilling. Dragon has been around for a long time. They've been going for about 5 years, and we're actually working quite closely with them in terms of sales and that type of thing. They've got a really good product with their ginger beer.
Yeah, I know. I had them. They stayed with me the last time they were in Durban. I've got a little cottage on the property, and I always invite I say it's the brewer's cottage. Any brewer from around the country is welcome to stay in the cottage, and
as long as they're paying beer.
They don't pay in beer, but
I think it's funny.
But it's quite nice to just get to know the guys. And when I'm in Cape Town, I know what it's like when you have to stay in rented accommodation or in B&B or in a hotel. It's just horrible.
You don't really get to see a city by staying in accommodation.
Yeah, exactly. So it's quite nice to have. I've had Florian from 333 stay here before, and he just stayed a whole week, and he said it was like being on holiday.
Yes.
Yeah, so it is quite nice. But back to your story. So how's the restaurant doing? Have you found that it's getting traction?
Yes, no, people are very responsive to that. The tours and tastings are popular. People haven't really experienced a distillery in KZN. So for them, there's a lot of education that happens, which they find interesting. Also, the industrial space is quite unique. And we're finding a lot of corporates and people who are looking for a function venue come and use 031 because we've got a lovely view over the railway line. It's quite photogenic. There's a lot of space. One of the bonuses of being in an industrial area, you can make a noise and you don't have neighbors getting upset. So actually we're pretty fully booked for the rest of the year with functions now, a lot of corporates and birthdays, and we've had weddings, engagement parties, that type of thing.
Yeah, I attended my sister-in-law's 40th. She had there, which was quite nice.
Quite festive.
Yeah, I think we left a bit early. We felt a bit old. But so is there a time when it's open to the public?
Absolutely. At the moment, Station Drive is kind of going through a bit of a flux. So the council has committed to upgrading the area, turning the road into a one-way improving the
I
parking and
noticed
that
it's
sort of thing.
actually a two-way. I always thought it was a one-way.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to be a two-way because you just you're very inefficient in terms of parking, and that's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, parking.
So at the moment, we don't open during the day for regular trading. We do functions and private bookings and things during the day, and then we open in the evenings, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and during the day, Saturday and Sunday. So you don't need to book; you can pop in. If you want to do a tasting, the best is to give us a call or drop us an email and book into one of our tasting slots. If you've got a group of people who want to come through for a tasting, we can do tastings any day of the week. We just need to book you in and make sure that we've got space available.
And are you finding that being upstairs from the brewery is it a good thing?
Yeah, I'm very much of the belief. There is a little bit of confusion. A lot of people think they're at the distillery when they walk into the brewery. Not everyone knows what a still looks like, unfortunately. But we're very much of the view that the more people in an area, the better. It gives you a bit of sense of gravity. We have a lot of people that will go down for a beer and then pop up for a gin and tonic.
Okay.
And they'll come and do a tour and tasting with us and then pop down for a beer afterwards. So there's quite a lot of synergy between the two businesses. I think our biggest problem is just parking, because it would be a lovely place for a lunch and a business lunch, but no one wants to drive around
and just look.
So, but I mean, I think that's going to be a month or two, and we'll hopefully have that sorted.
So the other guys in the area that have, I know there's been struggles with the zoning and the licensing, and that is it. Most of that sorted out, or is it still a fight?
We didn't have a problem with our licensing because it's zoned industrial, which is what we needed. So that side of things, fortunately for us, wasn't.
But in terms of retailing your
we got all of our licenses at the same time. Okay. So we've got 4 licenses. We've got a manufacturing license. We've got a restaurant license, so we can run tastings. We've got a retail license to have a shop, an off-con retail license, and then we've got a commercial distribution license. So we got that all at the same time, and I think that brewing company's got similar licenses.
Okay, so does that allow you to sell other people's stuff as well, or just yours?
It does. We could sell whatever we want. Okay. At the moment, our retail outlet, so we call it the shop at Distillery 031, is right adjoining the distillery. So it doesn't actually have direct street access. So it's not really a very much a kind of a retail, standalone retail outlet. At some stage, we will probably look at stocking other craft products and having a retail component once the parking situation is sorted out and there's more of a retail component in Station Drive, because it would be lovely to have a liquor store that only stocks craft. We will never be in the game of stocking quarts or cheap spirits. It's just not our business. No. I mean, it's a great business to be in, but it's not what we were wanting to do. But there's plenty of great craft beers, great spirits, and boutique wines, and I think Durbanites are starting to appreciate that. And I think if they came to an outlet which specialized in that, they definitely would appreciate it. And you see outlets like Tops and Hillcrest, Marriott Liquors doing really well because they've got an understanding of the smaller players in the market and the more niche type areas. Yeah,
and I've been working with Stefan and Natalie in Clarence, and they've been sourcing some other gins. So they've got a brewery in front, and then the gin tasting room behind the brewery, and they've also got a retail component where they sell other gins, I guess, mainly.
Yeah, I mean, their site in Clarence is perfect. You have a lot of holiday makers that come and spend the weekend there. And then what better place to go and see products that you wouldn't normally find in your local bottle store,
Yeah, so have you had much contact with the other distillers, like Topanga and...
Yeah, so I'm the KZN representative on the South African Craft Distillers Institute. So I was at the conference last year and I got to meet quite a few of the KZN distillers, and we kind of connect and communicate. And yeah, I think by and large craft distillers are in it together, and they're keen to help and to collaborate and share ideas. I mean, no one's going to share their top secret recipes, but definitely there to help and try and grow the industry as a whole, much like the craft brewing industry was, say, about 5 years ago. Craft spirits is still so tiny, And I don't think it's about market share. I think it's really about growing the market as a whole.
Just growing the category,
and making people aware of it. So, for example, there's a new distillery that's just started in Kommetjie, Deep South Distillery. I'm friends with the guys that have started that, and I was down in Cape Town this week and popped in and had a look how they're doing, and they've done the same.
They didn't send you samples?
I took samples back with me. No, that's the other thing.
He's waiting for his license.
Happy to share. Yeah, unfortunately, he couldn't sell me anything, but he gave me some samples.
I've also placed an order. I said, send us some stuff for Hillcrest, and he said he's not allowed to.
Yeah, they're having some issues with the licensing. It's a challenge. I think getting a license in the Western Cape is easier because of the brandy industry. So a lot of traditionally wine farms would have a brandy still. So the liquor board there is a little bit more used to craft distilling, whereas in KZN it's very, very new. But even still, I think Steve and James have been waiting for about a year and they haven't got their license yet.
In Kommetjie?
In Kommetjie, yeah.
So the Midlands guys said they only took 9 months to get their license.
Sure, that's very quick, eh? Yeah. Very, very quick. Yeah, I think we did the hard work for them. So
probably.
Because when we first applied, the liquor board kind of wanted us to jump through the same hoops as a massive, big industrial distillery would. So they didn't really know what craft meant, and they didn't really understand the process of using botanicals, for example, because they'd never seen a distillery that used botanicals. They just expected us to produce a neutral spirit and then add flavorants at the end. And we showed them the process. It was quite an education job, but I think the industry is slowly starting to mature a bit, and everyone's learning things.
So tell us a little bit about the brand and the different products that you sell.
Okay, so Distillery 031, obviously 031 being the dialing code for Durban, although to be honest, most people have cell phones these days, so it's becoming a bit of a relic. But very much about celebrating Durban, celebrating not just the stereotypical
and why not Durban Distillery? Is it not? You're a brand kind of guy. But
we wanted something a little bit different. We also wanted to celebrate the urban aspect of Durban. So in Station Drive, one of the things that was appealing to us about Station Drive for a home is that it's very much urban Durban. So you've got this 80s romantic view of Durban with beach holidays, but there's a lot more to Durban than just that. There's actually a big creative community in Durban. There's a massive music scene, and we wanted to tap into what Durban's about today, the urban side of Durban. So you were talking about growing up on a farm, and a lot of distilleries, particularly in the Western Cape, but in KZN as well, are on a farm. So they'll grow raw material and they'll distill it, and it's very much that sort of approach, which is fantastic. We wanted to have an urban distillery where we're kind of flipping it around. So rather than be somewhere out in the countryside, we wanted to bring our product to the people that are going to be consuming it, so they can actually be part of the distillation, see it happening. And the nice thing with distilling, as opposed to, say, for example, winemaking, is it doesn't require quite as much space. So you can do it in an urban setting, and so people can actually get to know your product. And as the market evolves and we grow, we want to involve our customers more and more and be able to do limited editions and show them things and educate them a bit and involve them in the process, which we couldn't do if we were stuck out in the middle of nowhere. So that's the kind of appeal of being in urban Durban. Then in terms of actual product brands, all of our products and all of our brands are linked to Durban in some way. So for example, our vodka is 031 Vodka. That's an obvious kind of name. The branding on it is all Art Deco. So most people don't realize, but Durban's got the biggest collection of Art Deco buildings in the Southern Hemisphere.
Really?
So after Miami, I think we've got the next best collection of Art Deco buildings. Architects come to Durban, they go absolutely nuts. They can't believe what buildings we've got. Durbanites just think they're old because they've been built more than 20 years ago. Yeah,
that's what old buildings look like.
They don't have an understanding or appreciation. So we've got amazing architecture and Art Deco particularly. So that's the sort of inspiration behind the label for our vodka. Then gin is obviously our signature spirit. Something we've been hard at work with and we're really proud of. And our gin brand is Durban. So the original name for Durban was Durban. It was named after Sir Benjamin Durban. And he was British, and he obviously drank a lot of gin and understood what gin was all about, and that's the kind of tradition we're wanting to follow. But we've got 2 gins at the moment. We've got a third one coming out later in the year. Durban Dry, which is our signature gin. It's a classic style gin with a bit of a modern twist to it. We use classic gin botanicals, very high quality juniper, which we source from Tuscany. So very, very clean juniper berries with a lovely complex flavor. We use other classical gin botanicals like cardamom, coriander, and that type of thing. 3 different types of citrus, so it gives us a nice fresh nose to it. And then we use an interesting botanical which is indigenous to KZN, and that is the African rosehip. So most people don't realize, but rose bushes actually produce fruit, and the fruit's got a lovely fresh flavor to it. So when the rose flower dies, the fruit actually starts growing on the bush. And we've got an indigenous rose in KZN, and that produces a rosehip which we use in our gin.
Okay.
So that's our Durban Dry Gin. We're really proud we won SA Gin of the Year at the New York International Spirit Competition for that. And we won a gold at the London Gin Masters and silver in San Francisco at the International Spirit Competition. So that's very much our signature spirit. But we've also got another gin, which is our barrel-aged gin. It's the first barrel-aged gin in South Africa. And one of the few globally. We entered that into the Gin Masters and won a gold again in London for that. And it was a relatively new category in gin. But we were quite impressed to see the number of European distilleries that are starting to play with aging.
That must have confused the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, I don't think they've quite got their heads around that, which I don't understand, because one of the drivers for us with making a barrel-aged gin was it must taste like a gin. So I didn't want to end up with a whiskey with juniper flavor to it. I very much wanted it to still be a characteristic.
What would be the difference?
So a gin typically has got a much more fresh flavor to it. You get a lot of those top notes. So you get the citrus, you get the subtleties that come through from the juniper, not just the pininess. You get some of the floral notes. Now you stick that in a barrel and you age it for too long, and all those notes get flattened out, and you end up with a very one-dimensional spirit, which starts to take on a lot of the woody character and mellows out. But it mellows out completely. Now, if you're aging a Scotch or a bourbon or a rum or something like that, you have a lot of very volatile congeners that you want to mellow out. So if you taste a moonshine or you taste a rum straight off the still, it's typically got quite a lot of top notes, very nosy and volatile, and it doesn't smell or taste particularly smooth. Over time, in the interaction with the wood, all those short chain esters group together, form nice long chain esters, and you get this wonderful smooth product. But that's all very well when it comes to a whiskey or a rum. When it comes to a gin, you don't really want that to happen, because the flavors that you're getting in a gin come from botanicals, and you want those fresh flavors. You don't want to lose all of that. So the way we make our gin, we don't age it for too long. We choose our wood quite carefully so that we get some of that wood coming through. We use French oak, so we get some nice spicy notes coming through in the gin. It is mellowed out, and it's great as a sipping gin, but you can very much taste that you're drinking a gin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. I've never seen any other.
No, I've heard of a few other distilleries that have started playing around with it. So I think you'll start to see barrel-aged gins coming through, and I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in it, which is fantastic.
I think there'll be a lot of innovation in gin altogether, I think.
Yeah, we've already got pink and blue gins, so people are trying to push the boundaries, and I think that's great. I think innovation is always good for a category. It makes it interesting, it makes it exciting, and it just means that you'll have your staple products that people are going to drink every day, and those are always going to be your big sellers. But then the innovation provides interest and fun for the category.
And it grows the category.
Yeah.
And then you've got some interesting absinthe. You've got some liqueurs.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, as a distillery 331, ultimately we're passionate about distilling. We're not just about coming up with a clever name for a product and getting someone else to distill it for us. And for us,
which is what I would do.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different approach.
Yeah.
So I think there's many ways to own a spirit brand or a beer brand, and there's no right or wrong way.
Yeah.
For me, the passion of distilling is the craft, and it's about a hand process where you actually understand the art behind distilling.
And it certainly sounds like you understand what you do. All those words.
I spent a lot of time doing it because I love it, and I think if you love something, you're always going to enjoy doing it. So that's very much our point of departure is loving distilling. And in my journey with distilling, I've traveled a lot. I've seen what a lot of distilleries are doing around the world, and obviously gin was one of the spirits, but definitely wasn't the only spirit. So, for example, I went to a number of distilleries in Norway which make aquavit, which has got quite a lot of aniseed flavor to it. It's a traditional Norwegian spirit.
And you can't find any Bommelunda or Linie, nothing.
You don't find that in South Africa, no. And interesting, Linie is aged, barrel aged, but it's aged for the time it takes for a ship to travel across the equator and back. So you're looking at about 6 weeks worth of aging. So very short aging period.
So do they actually still send it to the equator, or do they just...
No, they do.
Okay.
Well, so they claim. So I went to their distillery in Norway, and massive barrel house, hundreds of thousands of barrels of all sorts of different spirits. But their aquavit, they put into barrels in containers. The barrels have to get placed on deck so that they get maximum exposure to the tropical heat, and then they send it off to Kuala Lumpur or somewhere, and then literally the containers dock and get put back on a ship and sent straight back to Norway.
Crazy.
They never even unload them. But it means that they get the original flavor, and the reason that they do that is because historically the brand was exported, and it would have been sitting on a sailing ship and crossing the equator, and in those days there was no such thing as stainless steel tanks. So people exported everything from beer, and that's where you got your IPAs from, through to spirits, which is why you got aged drums and that sort of thing. They were all sold in casks, in oak casks. And the fact of them sitting on a ship in the heat meant that they would get some of the flavors from the wood, and they would mellow out, and people realized, wow, you get a superior product if it's aged rather than if it's fresh off the still. Pretty much everything else, if you produce it, you'd rather get it fresh from the producer. But spirits, fortunately, are a little bit different.
I found some Linie or the last few bottles of Linie in KZN I found at Booth's bottle store, but I think Herv's got them at
Has he taken them over? I've still got a few bottles from my trip to Norway.
And one of my favorites was always Bommelunda, which I guess is very similar to Linie, and the German version with one of the famous rock bands singing a Bommelunda song.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Northern European countries have got a tradition of a sort of herby type spirit, and absinthe is obviously one of the most prominent. But is it drunk? I mean, is it popular, or is it just a myth and a... No, so interestingly, absinthe was in France at the turn of the 20th century, so around 1900. It was the most popular spirit. It was consumed in higher quantities to cognac, brandy, vodka, anything else. It was the most popular spirit in France. And then it got banned, and so for a long time you couldn't buy absinthe legally in Europe. And then in the early 90s it was unbanned again, and started to become popular again. During the period when absinthe was banned, a lot of people moved to drink other spirits with a aniseed kind of base. So pastis, Purner, and in Greeks you've got ouzo, in Turkey raki, in Italy sambuca. All of those spirits, all the high quality versions, are also made with botanicals. The difference between them and absinthe is that absinthe is made with wormwood, which gives it a little bit of a buzz. Absinthe's got an active ingredient in it, which is a stimulant. So it's a bit of a pick-me-up. So it's quite a popular spirit like that. And in Europe, it's probably the fastest growing in the aperitif type category. South Africans, a little bit slow to start, but as people realize that it is quite a pleasant drink, it can be very smooth if it's made well with natural ingredients, which is how we make it. It's starting to become a lot more popular.
So how do you drink it? With water?
There are a number of different ways, and I guess there's never anything right or wrong
There's
when it
no
comes
right
to
or-
alcohol. Whatever.
I'll tell you what the wrong way is, just straight. We bought a bottle of Rogers. We nearly died.
So it's very strong. Absinthe generally is between 60 and 70%. Ours is 65%.
Okay.
So you're dealing with a strong drink, much stronger than tequila,
Yeah.
for example. A good absinthe you should be able to sip, and that's how I would typically drink absinthe, because it's very smooth. Although it's strong, it's made with natural botanicals, so you got a lot of the plant oils in it, and it's got a nice smooth flavor.
Okay.
The French way of drinking it, the traditional way, is to drip ice water into it, and that dilutes it down. So when the French were drinking absinthe in 19th century Paris, and Van Gogh and the philosophers and poets and artists were all having a good time and living the bohemian lifestyle, they were actually drinking it at about 15%, so like a glass of red wine. They were still getting quite drunk and out of hand, but they weren't taking shots and setting it on fire or anything like that.
Okay.
But we also use it in a lot of cocktails.
Yeah.
So it's quite a strong distinctive flavor. But if you balance it nicely, you can do it phenomenally, and it can be really nice. We've got a shaken shooter where we combine it with our coffee liqueur, and it tastes just like licorice of all sorts. And that's been very, very popular.
Okay. And that little spoon, the story.
So the little spoon, typically when you drink absinthe in a French style, you drip ice water over it. Some people like their absinthe sweeter. So what you do then is you put a spoon across your glass. So you're drinking it out of an absinthe glass, which looks a little bit like a wine glass. You put your spoon on top with a little cube of sugar, and as the water drips onto the sugar, it dissolves the sugar and sweetens the drink. And then you take the spoon out, stir your absinthe and drink it. And you have a white, kind of greeny white liquid. It's quite cloudy. That whole process of adding water is called louching. It's a French word, and it basically means to make it cloudy. So people who like a sweeter absinthe would use the spoon and drip the water over sugar. Our absinthe is naturally quite sweet, so we don't add any sugar to it, but a lot of plants have actually got sugars in them, so that adds to the sweetness. So most people that taste our absinthe don't feel that they need to add sugar to it, but it's obviously something you can do.
And if somebody's, I mean, I know there's some commercial absinthes. I think Edward Snell sells one. I can't remember what the
Dube is
brand
one
is.
of the,
Dubes,
yes.
yeah. Now, is that anything close to what you make, or is it?
Look, I don't like to be disparaging about other brands, because everyone has their place. But just in general, so no specific brands, but in general, your cheaper absinthes tend to be artificially flavored.
So
they're synthetic flavors, and they tend to be artificially colored. So anything that's bright green is not going to be a natural absinthe. Our absinthe starts off pretty green, but the color comes from the plants. And over time, as they get exposed to UV light, those ingredients, those chlorophylls from the plant, start to become slightly brown. So you'll notice a real absinthe, if it's more than a few weeks old, starts to get a kind of browny green color to it. And if it's bright green, then it's just not natural.
Then it's not natural.
And that's why they're obviously a lot cheaper, because to make something from natural products only, it's far, far more expensive and more time consuming.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday about when I had my own brands, and that must be 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when the whole caramel vodka thing was so exciting, and it was all just completely synthetic in beautiful, those flask bottles.
Yes.
And I mean, $1 million businesses, but now a couple of years later, everything is natural and handmade. And
yeah, look, fundamentally, I believe that you need to start off with a quality product.
Yeah.
You can have the best advertising and the most sexy packaging, and it'll sell for a while. But if you want to be a brand that's around for 100 years, you need to make a good product.
Yeah.
And a lot of those synthetic products, they taste nice to start, but they have a horrible aftertaste. You wake up feeling not so good. And at the end of the day, people are moving away from artificial and towards natural. And that's what we've tried to do. So you mentioned the caramel vodka. We've got an aperitif or liqueur, which has got a vodka base, and it's vanilla and baobab flavor. So you're getting the kind of vanilla flavors that you would get with a caramel vodka, but it's made with 100% natural ingredients. So we use Madagascan vanilla, which is a beautiful product with real Madagascan vanilla beans. And we use the fruit of the baobab tree, which gives it a lovely creamy flavor. And they combine to give you a lovely liqueur, which you can sip. You can use in cocktails, over ice cream, in all sorts of different drinks. And the difference between that and an artificial product is that you can taste the flavor. It's a lot more subtle. It's a lot more complex, and you don't have any of that synthetic aftertaste.
Okay. Yeah, that is. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think people are starting, and again, it does mean things are a bit more expensive, so you're paying a premium, but people are starting to
pay more, drink less.
That's it. It's people are aware of health benefits or the health consequences of drinking too much. You can't drink and drive, so people would rather spend a bit more, have a fewer number of glasses of a higher quality spirit. And for me, that's the responsible side to craft brewing and distilling. Is you'd rather have people appreciate what they're drinking and taste it, rather than just drinking for effect and trying to get it drunk as quickly as possible.
And I see that you've also got a brandy. Is that
that's been an interesting collaboration. So we have got a brandy, and
not with Jack Parra.
Not with Jack Parra. No. Ours is a 10-year-old brandy. It won a gold medal at the Michelangelo Awards, and it's an interesting project. I collaborated with family friends who've got a winery down in Wellington.
Okay.
One of the few properly certified organic wineries in the country. And they also have a brandy distillery, and they've got their own brand of brandy. They've been distilling brandy for 25 years. And when I was starting my distillery journey, they were one of the distilleries that I went and visited, and had a look around and chatted to Edmund about his process, and I was really impressed at the quality of brandy he makes. And then when we started the restaurant, I wanted to have a brandy, and at that stage, we either had your cheap commercial brandies, or you could pay a bit more for a premium pot still brandy, which is what we started stocking. But I thought it would be nice to have a blend of brandy, which I was involved in. So I worked with Edmund and came up with a unique blend for Distillery 031. So using his minimum 10-year-old barrel-aged brandy, all laid down in French oak, we came up with a blend which you won't buy anywhere else. Really, really nice, smooth brandy, kind of cognac style that you can sip, because ultimately a good brandy is something you should taste and not just drown with Coke. Nothing wrong with drinking it with Coke, but it makes a big difference if what you're starting off with is a nice spirit. Yeah. So we don't distill that ourselves, but we're involved in the blending process, and nice to be able to take a product like that and give it a more modern spin. So that's what we're working on at the moment. So I think if you were talking about Jack Parra, he's put a very modern spin on brandy, and obviously in the budget segment of the market. We're wanting to put a more modern spin, but on the more premium side of the market. Yeah.
And do you think there's an opportunity to do something with cane, which is so Durban?
Interesting. A lot of people have an affinity to cane. I've worked quite closely with the guys from Beaver Creek Coffee on various projects, and they at one stage had a cane brand. They were wanting to sort of launch a craft style cane brand. I think if you were marketing it right, you may be able to do something. One of the things with cane, and I'm talking about the commercial cane, is really it's not a whole lot different from vodka. It's just a slightly lower grade vodka that hasn't gone through quite the same distillation process. But you're not dealing with a unique spirit. In a lot of other countries, it would be sold as vodka. It would just be a cheaper vodka. So
what is the difference? I mean, a lot of the vodka we buy in South Africa would be cane. I mean, cane spirit based.
Correct. So essentially,
is that what they call sea spirits?
So essentially, what those kind of distilleries do is they take low grade molasses, which is a byproduct of the sugar industry. So we use molasses for our distilling, but we use food quality molasses, which is a premium molasses and doesn't have any of the impurities and the sulfurs and things. Your big industrial distilleries will take cheap molasses, and they then ferment it and distill it with massive big columns which strip out everything. So they strip out a lot of the impurities, but they also strip out all the flavor. And obviously the process to distill it, there's cost involved in that because of the time and the electricity and all that sort of stuff. So the more pure they make it, the better quality that spirit is. And the very pure spirit they produce, they sell to your commercial vodka brands in South Africa, and it's vodka. They might filter it a bit after that, but that's essentially what they do. and then the less pure spirit they sell as cane. But essentially, there's not much different in it.
Can you taste the difference?
I can taste the difference. But in a lot of countries, you would get away with selling that cane as vodka. It would still classify as vodka.
And is there legal classification here to differentiate between the two? Or not really?
I don't think there is any difference. I think that there's designations for cane and vodka, but I think if you send samples off and mix them up, I don't think they wouldn't.
The one is just red and the other one's blue.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And... yeah, enough. But I think cane is at the moment not much happening with cane.
No, as I say, it really is a cheap spirit, and that's why it's got so popular. A lot of people confuse cane with cachaça, which is a Brazilian spirit, and we make a cachaça. The difference is with cane is it's made with a cheap molasses, basically, whereas cachaça is made with fresh sugarcane juice.
And what's the difference between that and rum agricole?
Technically nothing, but the process gives it a slightly different flavor profile. The Brazilians love their volatile components. I think they leave a lot of the heads in when they take their cuts for cachaça. So most South Africans that I introduced to real mass-produced Brazilian cachaça tell me that it smells like nail polish remover or thinners, and so it's not particularly popular. But there are some great cachaças out there in Brazil, and they're very similar to rum agricole. They do age cachaças, but when they age it has a subtly different flavor to a rum agricole, which has got more of a rumminess to it. But it's crazy that in South Africa no one has done anything like that. So that's why we launched our KwaZulu cachaça. So I've been to Brazil and seen how they do it there, and we use the same process with a copper pot still to produce our cachaça, and you can use that in cocktails like caipirinhas, a number of different Brazilian style cocktails, and you get some of the flavor that comes through from the fresh sugar cane. So you were saying about cane, you don't really taste much of a difference between cane and vodka. There's a subtle difference, but it's not actually made from sugar cane, whereas a cachaça is actually made from sugar cane. So you get the freshness, you get some of those green notes that come through from the plant.
Yeah, and in terms of the retail sector, I mean, that's another thing. When I try and put the category together, I don't know where to put all these bottles.
It's a huge challenge, and I always say I don't want to be at eye level, but then that's because I'm a bit tall, and eye level is on the top shelf for most people, which is a bit high. But we've moved from a situation where you had maybe 2 or 3 craft gins and they were just stuck on the shelf next to all the other gins, to a situation where you've got a whole shelf of craft gins and there's 4 other gins that don't fit onto the shelf, which is great. It shows the industry is growing. I think it's going to mature, and the retailers are going to have to cull down the number of products they have.
Certainly cane, Captoria, and the other one, what's the other one?
Mainstay,
they're certainly going to get less shelf space.
They are, and those are the kind of categories which are bought on price, and people who are drinking that aren't going to be spending 300-400 rand on a bottle of craft spirits. So they're going to go to the counter and they're going to know where to find their blue top, and they're going to buy it at based on price, and that will still sell 100 times what the entire craft industry sells. But I think with craft, it's more like the wine category. People have got to see it, they've got to read about it, they've got to get to know it. If you want to position yourself as a retailer that's selling craft spirits, you need to have a fairly good selection. You don't need to have every single product, and you can't have every product. But the one advantage of spirits over beers, for example, is they don't have the shelf life issues. So you can afford to have a bottle sitting for 6 months and not moving, and it's not going to go bad. And
you can ship it because it's 300 rand a bottle and not...
Correct. You're not shipping water, you're shipping firewater.
Do you know, I met a guy at Van der Merwe Hotel, I think, probably 15, 20 years ago, and we were having a pub lunch there, and the guy was saying that they used to get issued, I think he worked for a distillery or a sugar farm, and they used to get issued a gallon of cane, and then they had to water it down, and there was a whole story, and
there were a lot of different interesting stories around that. So I think a long time ago, probably before the sugar industry was as regulated as it is. A lot of the workers on sugarcane estates had primitive little stills in their houses, and they would have made moonshine, essentially illegal cane spirits, and probably didn't know very much about getting rid of methanol and ended up going blind and that type of thing. And then some of the distilleries some of the sugar mills at that stage also had distilleries on site, and they would issue their staff with cane. Now, unfortunately, because of excise duties, it actually costs 187 Rand per litre of absolute alcohol. So if your employer wanted to give you free spirits, they would still have to pay the excise duty on it. So it gets quite expensive. So for your average bottle of spirit, even if you gave it away, you would still be paying duties, 60 odd Rand in duties. Yeah. So I think those days are numbered. I think the wine industry might still give their workers their pup sacks with cheap wine in it, but not so much in the sugar industry.
Yeah, you talk about workers. My brother's got some farms on the Orange River, and his workers make mousse. They call it mousse, and what they do is they steal the grapes and put them in plastic bags and hide it in the vineyard, and it ferments in the plastic bag, and they drink that, and they just
that must be pretty
not productive after that.
No, I can imagine. One of the things with grapes is the alcohol that it produces has got quite a lot of methanol in it.
Okay.
Because of the skins and because of the grape seeds. So when you make a grappa, you've got to be quite careful with the way you distill it. You've got to throw away quite a lot of your foreshots because it tends to have methanol in it. And some of those informal producers, should we say, I don't think understand those principles. So their long-term health is probably not very good.
Yeah. Wow. And just getting back to the retail business,
yes.
I mean, how can we help the retailer? Again, you've got Absinthe, you've got Kashasha, and there's not a big category. I mean, where does one display those products?
So it's interesting. I think you've almost got two categories in craft spirits. You've got gin, which has become this beast unto its own. It's got its own life.
Then you've got vodka, which doesn't sell.
So you've got vodka, which is in South Africa isn't selling as well as craft vodka isn't selling so well. Yeah. In other parts of the world, it's the most popular category. Okay. We just don't have a tradition of sipping vodka. So if you go to Scandinavia or to Russia, you go for dinner with someone, they won't have a bottle of wine necessarily. They'll bring out a really nice bottle of vodka. They'll bring out some whiskey glasses, and they'll pour you 250 mils of vodka, and you sip that neat. You don't even have ice with it. And you might have a beer on the side to quench your thirst, but you're drinking vodka. Okay. So now if you're drinking vodka like that, you want a nice quality vodka. You don't want something that's got no flavor to it. Yeah. So in those markets, your craft vodkas are selling really well. Okay. In South Africa, vodka for us means something that you mix with lime and lemonade. Yeah. So people aren't very discriminating generally about vodka. But we've had some interesting people come through the distillery. We've had people from Poland, from Scandinavia, from Russia, and some of the other Nordic countries. And they're very excited to be able to find a vodka they can sip. But yeah, within the retail environment, you've got gin, which really now at this stage is the kind of flavor of the month and needs to be treated as a category unto its own. And then I think the opportunity is to then create a second craft spirits category where you group your craft spirits by category. So, for example, their craft rums, your cachaça would fall into that, your craft liqueurs, your vodkas, your moonshines. And over time, we're going to start seeing craft aged whiskies. You'll see some craft bourbons. There are a few craft rums on the market at the moment. We're busy aging rum at the moment, so in a few years' time you'll have some nice rum from us, hopefully. And at that stage, then your craft spirit category will be quite mature. But it's nice. It would be nice for people to know, okay, that's craft spirit. Within the craft category, these are the sectors that I'm interested in. And so they know, okay, if I'm looking for a liqueur, these are the brands. Here's some cherry liqueur from Clarence. There's some vanilla and baobab or some coffee liqueur from Distillery 031, and they can make their choice like that.
I mean, at Hillcrest, there's some craft spirits from 2003 from Wilderer, or I don't even know who was distilling it. So Wilderer has obviously been around for
He's been around with his grappa, yeah.
And that might have even been a German fruit schnapps or something, but certainly.
Well, I mean, take Wilderer, for example. So the old man, unfortunately, has passed on. But he was quite a pioneer in South African craft spirits, although at the time it wasn't really craft in the sense that there was no craft industry, but he was a craft distiller.
Yeah.
And he made a very good quality grappa. I really enjoy his grappa. Now, most South Africans don't know grappa. So majority of his sales historically has been exported to Germany, which is where his family is from. So he's had a really, really successful business exporting grappa and built his business on the back of that. In recent years, they've launched a gin and started to expand, but their whole business was built on grappa. If he was trying to sell grappa in South Africa, he would have been in a situation like that. So I'm pretty sure that there's probably some 10-year-old bottles of grappa sitting in the tops, and that's not 10-year-old age. That's just because it hasn't sold. And that's just because, particularly in KZN, but in South Africa in general, we don't understand the grappa category. You go to Italy and you go to other parts of Europe, and grappa is a really important category.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful. Very, very niche spirits aren't going to sell.
Yeah, it is difficult, and then there's also the difference between what I call patstaleki stuff and the Clarence liqueurs. For me, nearly fall into that. There's some other distillers that ask me to sell their stuff, and I say it just doesn't. It appeals to kind of a gifting market, which...
Yeah, no, I think if you go to a particular place and there's something that's handmade and hand-labelled, then you accept that the quality isn't going to be quite as sophisticated. And it's fine, it's an experience, it reminds you of that experience. But if you're going to be buying something in a urban bottle store, you want it to have consistency of product. You want the quality to be a little bit higher. You want the packaging to be a bit more sophisticated. And that's where craft spirits have moved to. There's definitely a model at having a kind of farm stall style spirit, particularly if you have a tasting on your farm. So I don't know what the plans are, but if you go to Nottingham Road Brewery, for example, they're making a gin there now. It's got quite a sort of basic labelling and that sort of stuff. And people who go in to drink at the pub and see the brewery, they're happy with that. It'll sell like that. But obviously, if they're wanting to become a national brand, then you've got to realize you're competing with gins from around the world, and it's a different kind of market. Yeah. So a place for everyone, but I think you just got to understand where you want to fit into the equation.
And the biggest gains have probably been the bottle supplies, haven't they?
Not Consol, because unfortunately they're geared up towards mass production, and all of us
Sailor Glass and those
kind of guys. Yeah, there's a lot of European bottle manufacturers that are doing well out of South African.
When I was in Munich the other day at the Drink Tech, there was a guy, and he was a label designer, and he displayed some beautiful bottles. So we took some photos. It actually turns out he's from the same village where Rolf from 333 is from.
Oh, okay.
And he designed their label, and he had a whole lot of contracts from Distell.
Oh, okay.
Maybe through Rolf or some contact. But anyway, there were some beautiful bottles, and mainly from Italy, I think,
France, Slovenia. A lot of these European countries have. You see, in South Africa, Consol is a world-class bottle manufacturer, and we produce glass at a cost comparative with China, with Brazil, anywhere in the world, because we've got massive SAB, we've got the likes of Distell, and those guys produce millions and millions of bottles. So Consol's geared up towards that. They're not geared up for specialty glass. So for them to make our bottles, the time that it takes to change the mold is the time that we should be produced for. So it's just not cost effective for them. In your European countries, you've got massive producers, and then you've also got specialty companies which have much slower lines. We pay probably at least 10 times as much for a bottle as Distell would pay, because our bottles tend to be thicker and higher quality, number one, but mainly that they are made in very small runs and they're imported. So we're paying a lot for that. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's no locally produced craft bottles that have cork closures and are up to the standard that we would look for craft spirits.
But you've got some innovation. Did that project work where you said bring your bottle back and you could...
So yeah, what we've done, we're encouraging people to not waste. So our bottles are lovely. A lot of people will buy our bottles and take the label off. You can soak them off in hot water. We use a paper-based label, so it doesn't leave a sticky residue. And they then use them for water, and they'll keep it in their fridge and have a nice chilled bottle of water. What we do for KZN customers is if they bring their bottle back, they can get credit at our shop or at the bar and restaurant. So it's a kind of a return process. So it helps everyone. We get those bottles back and we can reuse them. And for your customer, you're getting something back. And it's working reasonably well. I think as people become more aware of it, they'll bring it in. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And just explain again to the listeners where they can find you.
So you can find us in all good bottle stores. At the moment, Tops's have a pretty good selection. You can also find it in a number of the other Norman Goodfellas, Liquor City, Blue Bottle, a number of those outlets. If your local bottle store doesn't have us, ask them. A lot of bottle stores in South Africa are franchised stores, so they're owner run and managed. So it ultimately is up to the owner to decide what he wants to stock. So although we've got listed with their head offices, when it comes down to it's the owner that makes the decision whether he wants to stock a craft product. And a lot of the time he isn't necessarily a craft drinker himself. But if you go into your local bottle store and you ask for one of our products, ask for some Durban Dry gin, and they don't have it, the next time our rep visits, he'll place an order and he'll get it to you. If you can't find us where you're looking, you can always go online, Cyberseller, Yuppie Chef. They stock our products online. They'll deliver to your door. Or you can email us at the distillery on info@distillery031.com, not .coza, and we'll put you in contact with a retailer in your area that'll supply
and
you.
As far as distribution, you've got Joburg covered, KZN obviously, and Western
Cape. We're busy finalising the Eastern Cape. I'm actually going to be down in the little town of Bedford next weekend to open their garden show. I'm doing a tasting for the garden folk there, and we'll be running a craft gin bar at the Duke of Bedford, which is a country hotel there. And it's one of the more popular festivals in the Eastern Cape. People come from East London and PE and Plet to come and see the beautiful gardens in the Karoo. So we've got a distributor who's going to start stocking us there. So you should see us on the garden route by the end of the year.
Okay, and then at the distillery, that's in Station Road, just off Umgeni Road near the stadium.
That's right. So we 43 Station Drive, off Umgeni Road, just after Goble Road, before the Lion Match Factory.
And above the brewery.
Above the brewery. So if you see the brewery, carry on one flight of stairs up, and you'll see the distillery. During office hours, you can go up to reception, and we'll open up the shop and supply you with whatever you want.
And tell us quickly just this first Thursday thing that's happening in
Station Drive. Yes.
Station Drive?
So
I haven't been to it yet. I've been to the one in Cape Town, but not here.
So definitely worth attending. First Thursday has actually started off in London. It was started by art galleries. They were having a problem attracting people to their galleries, and they realized the big problem was that art galleries are open during the week and people work during the week. So tourists were coming to art galleries, but Londoners weren't. The only time they could go would be on the weekends. So they came up with a clever idea, and that was to stay open late one Thursday night a month, first Thursday of the month. And it started off with art galleries, and then people started having pop-up art exhibitions, and food trucks started opening on the streets and pop-up bars. And it became a movement in itself. And Cape Town being what they are, they started doing that a few years ago. And it's now become an incredibly popular thing on the Cape Town social calendar. At the beginning of 2016, end of 2016, we started doing First Thursdays in Station Drive. And it's become really, really popular. Some interesting exhibitions, performance art.
We're on the street?
On the street in the different spaces. So at 031 Bar and Restaurant, we've got one DJ down in the bar and restaurant. We open up our balcony bar and we have different DJs up there. There's very often live music on the street. The one First Thursdays, there was a indoor skateboard ramp. We've had street art. We've had all kinds of exhibitions, lots of food trucks. The street basically closes down. People can walk around, get something to eat, drink, listen to the music, and then afterwards come for a cocktail or gin and tonic at our bar.
You park in Umgeni Road?
You park in Umgeni Road. We've got car guards. There's normally about 15 car guards on duty, so it's a big thing. Or otherwise, catch a taxi or Uber. Don't drink and drive. Rather, get an Uber and have an extra couple of cocktails, and you'll have a good evening.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. It was
Pleasure.
lovely chatting to you.
Thanks very much for having me.
We'll see you at the distillery soon.
Excellent. Right, looking forward to it.
Cheers.
Thanks.